with a few logistics before we get started. First, we have great participation in the webinar, as I think you all can see the participant count. Got over 60 and it keeps climbing on the call. As a result, we've muted everyone for the webinar. If you have any questions throughout, please put those into the Q&A. You should see at the bottom right. And as we move through the webinar, we'll try to cover as many of those questions as we can at the end with any time remaining, but any that we don't have time to cover, we will definitely reach out and provide answers to those questions. So normally, you would see the contact us come at the end of a presentation, and it will again at the end of this one as well, but we wanted to emphasize that your interaction with CEDS doesn't have to be done in a silo, so you don't have to go it alone. Yes, CEDS has a number of resources and tools at your disposal, but we as the CEDS team, we are here to help you navigate all of that. So at any point, feel free to contact me directly or use the CEDS contact us link. If you need a personalized CEDS training, we can get on a call with you and your team. You can ask questions as we go. Maybe you need more than one call. Maybe you could use several scheduled support calls, or you just want to reach out to us with a few questions. Whatever that is, there's no cost to your organization. This is just part of what CEDS offers to you. So feel free at any point to reach out with questions. But I would say if I don't respond in the next 50 minutes or so to your email, just know that that's because I'm conducting the webinar right now. All right. So at the kickoff of the CEDS open source community, I think the primary question is why open source? So what at this point resulted in the decision to move in this direction? CEDS has always been governed by stakeholders. CEDS is 10 years old, and at its inception, it was a community of stakeholders, many of whom may well be on this call, who conceived it, who set it in motion, who developed it over the last 10 years, and it's always been available to use freely by anyone. So the move toward open source and putting everything out in the GitHub repository, as we'll show you in a little, has more to do with demand and the shift toward community development and flexibility. For the last 7 versions of CEDS, and even with version 8 that's coming out for public comment on November 22nd, the cycle for development is a year-long process. Many different stakeholders from multiple work groups and organizations, they work on various aspects and use cases of CEDS throughout the year, and those get released for public comment and yearly inclusion into the standard. And with the onset now of so many physical implementations of CEDS taking place, the speed at which updates will be required and the need for greater community development of the standard is growing, and it's going to continue to grow exponentially. And so the move to open source enables this more dynamic process of the development of the standard. Because of this more dynamic development environment, the open source community first, it increases the breadth of who can contribute to actual code development. One stakeholder identifies the need to add additional elements to the data model, and a group of stakeholders work to define those elements, and then they create the adjustments to the model and include those new elements. The community as a whole, they approve the changes and then they adopt them. So a small handful of stakeholders contribute and the entire community benefits. This allows all of us as stakeholders to better leverage efforts. So stakeholder A, for example, may contribute 25% of their time. Stakeholders B, C, and D contribute 25% of their time. Stakeholder A gets 100% of effort back by only giving 25% of their time because they can leverage, they can use what the other stakeholders have contributed. Now, I know it's a rudimentary example, and it may be that stakeholder A only gets 15% of what's created by the other stakeholders, but presently, stakeholders who aren't using standards only get back what they put in, nothing else. So anything created in the open source community through CEDS, it can also be leveraged by others in the community, and this as a whole improves the standard and it increases the resources available to the community as a whole. So let's take a look at this structurally. CEDS is a P20W standard, and its data models are focused on primarily longitudinal data. What we have here is a diagram of any stakeholder's environment conceptually. There are sources from a variety of P20W education systems, whether it be K-12, early childhood, adult ed, post-secondary, whatever. Those are integrated somewhere and ultimately are stored somewhere so that on the right side, questions can be answered about those data to inform decisions. Often, what you find in the middle isn't CEDS. It's custom. But we see that that is actually rapidly changing in the education environment. When it is custom, this means that sources on the left are customized. To load the center, which is customized, and then outputs are created, which are specific to that custom environment. And in an environment like that, any development work a stakeholder does is only applicable to that environment. But in a model like this, where CEDS is at the core, standard processes can be used to load the standard CEDS integrated data store. Standard processes can store that data longitudinally in the CEDS data warehouse, and standard outputs can be created to provide data to inform decisions. In an environment like this, when one stakeholder adds a standard way to move data out of one P20W education system into the CEDS integrated data store, all stakeholders benefit. And when CEDS is expanded to include additional elements, all stakeholders can expand those elements. And when one stakeholder creates output from CEDS, again, all stakeholders can produce the same output out of their system. Switching over here now. A good example of this is the CID Generate tool. So the Center for the Integration of IDA Data, they produced a tool that sits on the CEDS integrated data store, and it sits on the CEDS data warehouse. And that tool can produce EDFACS files using the data in those two environments. And as you're well aware, there's many states that are using that same tool. And so they have that environment. They have the CEDS integrated data store, they have the CEDS data warehouse, and so they can produce EDFACS tools out of that particular location. What we need to realize is that this is just one use case. So the CID Generate tool is one use case for this. It's the first one, and it's rapidly being adopted, but what will be the next use case? Who is it that's going to create the records request tool, right, that sits on top of it and drop that into the open source community for everyone to use? Someone might create a set of standard analytics scripts that produce answers to high priority research questions out of this data store. So when one stakeholder creates anything using this standard structure in the middle, anyone else with this structure could use it. And I know right now that the SLDS state support team is working on this very thing. They're working on producing some answers to some standard research questions out of this data store. States who have Generate installed, they have this middle section already installed in their state, and they'll be able to take advantage of the outputs from that work group. So what we're trying to convey here is something I know you already know. There's great benefit when we work as a community together to develop. So this is the vision and reasoning behind CEDS going open source. This was already possible, as Generate shows, as one example, but open source provides a much easier on-ramp for more stakeholders to contribute to the community as a whole. So what does the open source process look like? I'll take this at a high level and then take you to the actual screens inside of GitHub to give an example of how this process is going to work. The process itself really is not new. For 10 years, this has been the process of governance for CEDS. The open source community is just going to make it easier to interact within this process and get results faster for the community. So the first step is use case submission and verification. Very simply put, there's not a lot of point in doing any work unless someone actually needs it to be done. So a stakeholder who needs something new or updated in CEDS, they submit a use case. CEDS talks with them to make sure they understand the use case and it's not something that's already in CEDS. And after that, we move to the next step. So review design options and development. In this, we know what we need. Now, how do we get there? And it's in this step we start bringing in other stakeholders to help define and design. Again, also, this is not a new process for CEDS, but the open source community will make it easier for multiple stakeholders to contribute. Anyone's welcome to join at this point and contribute, obviously, inside this step. Once we have a good idea of what needs to be added or changed, we know how we're going to do it. We go to the next step, which is community assessment. You can think of community assessment as the yearly public comment period that CEDS has, but instead of yearly, we're going to do it on a use case by use case basis. So if it's ready to go, we let everyone know, and we get a thumbs up or thumbs down. Thumbs down, we go back to step 2, rework it, try to figure things out, right? Thumbs up, we do some additional testing in the quality assurance step. So just like CEDS has always done, there's a vetting process. The nice thing about the open source community is now that you will have access to see the changes directly in the physical model of CEDS. You will know how it's going to impact your current implementation. You can pull down and update code. You can run it in your test environment. You can provide feedback from actual implementations. You all decide when it's just a new addition. you all decide as a community when you want to break something, right? So whatever it is, the community is going to be deciding that, and you'll be able to actually utilize the code in the repository to see what's changing. CEDS has always been and will always be your standard. So in between the quality assurance and the last step, which is to incorporate it into the upcoming version, we're going to do a last call from the community. If the community is in agreement, it gets the stamp of approval. This may occur months before the next yearly release of CEDS. Why is this important? Because some stakeholders can't wait the full year to get things implemented. So when changes make it past this last step, stakeholders can adopt it in their systems now with full confidence. The rapid development makes it easier to expand and update CEDS and implement it much more efficiently than waiting for the yearly cycle to complete. CEDS is still going to be released annually, though, so know that. But stakeholders who are actively involved in the open source community will already know what is in that release. And likely they'll already have implemented some or all of it before it even comes out for public comment. And as for public comment, the majority of that public comment will already have occurred in the open source community with those actively implementing CEDS, ensuring what is released early is tested and it's going to meet the needs of the community. So let's take a look here at where all this is going to take place. The repository where the use cases are stored and where the CEDS data models reside is a GitHub repository called CEDS Standards. And anyone can go and look at this right now. Pull down code, review documentation, and the use case. But to contribute to the standard or to add a use case or follow what is happening, you will need to have a GitHub account. And so the next slides I'm going to walk you through are going to show you how to set up that account. The first thing you do is you would go to github.com. If it doesn't already show on the screen how to sign up for a GitHub, you can click the sign up box in the top right corner. You would enter your username, whatever you would want that to be, if it's not already taken, and then your email address where you would want to receive notifications, and then obviously a password to be able to log in. The next screen is going to have you select the plan that's right for you. Most of us have worked or are working in state or local agencies, so free is right for us. And any interactions you need to do with the CEDS open source community, those can all be done with a free account. So there's no need to click on the pro. You would just go with what's free. On the next screen, GitHub is collecting some more information. We know all about data collection. They're collecting information about you, and you can opt to answer those questions if you want, or you can just scroll to the bottom of the screen, and then you can skip that information and skip that step. And then an email is going to be sent to the address you provided needing verification. You go check your email box, and you'll have an email in there, and then you can click to verify the email address. Once you do that, you're going to be directed to the GitHub site, and it's going to ask if you want to create a repository. Likely you do not, and for CEDS, you don't need to. So from here, you can search for CEDS in the search box, or you can just go to the actual browser and type in github.com/CED standards, and it's going to take you to the CEDS open source community page, which is where I'm going to take you now. So I'm going to share that, and we're going to take a look at it live. So after logging in, if you have an account on GitHub and you go to the CEDS page here, you will be able to see the live account. And I'm going to show you here some of the use cases that have already been submitted, and I'm going to walk you through the process of submitting a new use case. There's a lot of other features in GitHub that we're not going to go over today, but we can go over in other webinars or separately with your team if you're interested. But today specifically, I want to make you aware of how to submit a use case. Presently, there are 3 repositories. As I scroll down, they go here, CEDS Standards, 3 repositories located on GitHub. Those are the CEDS Collaborative Exchange, the CEDS IDS, which is the CEDS Integrated Data Store, and then also the CEDS Elements. The Collaborative Exchange, which is up here, is a location where codes such as queries that pull data from a CEDS database can be placed for others to use. Now, there's nothing there now, but this is the vision right from those first slides that I had shown of that structure of being able to leverage the code others have written to speed up data use. The CEDS IDS is the P20W normalized CEDS physical database. This structure is a database that integrates all of the 1,700, or it's over 1,700, CEDS elements into a single integrated data set. And the CEDS elements repository, that's where elements, definitions, option sets, etc., those things are tracked. The one repository missing from this list of 3 is the CEDS data warehouse. And Michigan is actually working on that, adding to what the CID Generate team had created, and we expect to see that repository opened up by the end of this year, fingers crossed. This would then be the CEDS standard data warehouse, and we expect much of the growth over the next year will probably be in that location. It's going to contain somewhere around probably 300 to 400 elements of the total CEDS 1,700 elements. So as use cases come in utilizing that warehouse structure, it will grow rapidly. If we take a look now inside of the CEDS elements repository, there's a place above here to watch and unwatch. And basically that's to watch the entire repository. So clicking on this, if you go to watch it, it's going to let you know when anything at all changes in the repository. If you don't want to know that much activity, you can also just watch individual issues. Issues in GitHub equal use cases. So when I say we're going to add a use case, what you're adding in GitHub is an issue. This is where it all begins. So I'm going to click on issues, and you'll be able to see here that we do have one issue or use case, which is to add an organization and a program type to support early and middle college. If we click on this, opening that up, we can read what the use case is all about. Basically, Michigan tracks schools that offer early and middle college, and they also track students in high school who are enrolled in that program, and they want to track those students that are taking the early and middle college. So they need an organization type in CEDS that informs them that the organization is early and middle college, and they also need a program type that would show a student enrolled in that type of program. Just a shout out, if you track similar information in your agency about early and middle college, or you're an early middle college organization, you can comment below inside of here and let us know what it is that you track or information about that. This is how we start to gather information about this particular use case. You can also email me if you want to be part of discussions as we start to take a look at defining out early and middle college, and that would let you get involved in that particular process. You can see over here on the right side that I have an option to unsubscribe. What I'm doing is I'm following the whole repository because I'm watching it up here where it says watch. But if I was not following the whole repository, then I would have an option here to subscribe, and then I'd be able to subscribe to just this one use case. And then anything that comes in related to this and the comments, etc., I would get an email about that use case. All right, so we're going to go back to the Issues tab, and we're going to walk through adding a new use case. To do this, you would go to the repository that's impacted. So right now I'm in the CEDS elements. Many times it's going to be more than one repository impacted, but you do not have to worry about that. Just enter the issue or use case where you think it applies, and we can add it to another location if needed. As an example, the early middle college we were talking about, that would be a new option set, and that is obviously going to affect elements because we're adding an option set to the elements. But once it's added to the elements, it's also going to affect the integrated data store because by adding that option set there, we're going to also need to add it into the reference table that's stored in the integration data store. So there's going to be a change there as well. But you don't need to worry about opening it up in both locations. You just start a use case where it makes sense to you for whatever it is that you need. So for my example, I'm going to be adding or changing an element. So I'm in the elements page. And so I'm going to click New Issue. And there are two options that show up, bug and the CEDS element or option set use case. A bug, that's mainly for things like misspellings or grammatical issues that you might find inside of elements. But for this use case, I'm going to select the CEDS element or option use case. And then it needs some information from me. So This is for capturing things. These can be quite extensive, or they can also be rather basic. What we really need is just to know what you need, and then we can have conversations with you to expand upon that or to get information in here. So you don't have to make it something that's relatively difficult to do. So for this one, the authors of this, as we've been working on it, Nathan Clinton, who's working directly with Michigan, is on the AEM team, and then myself, we've had discussions around this, and Michigan would also be involved. So the authoring organization is Michigan. Michigan, let's get a title here. They're needing some things disaggregate. Is that spelled correctly? I don't know, but we're going to go with it. The homeless primary nighttime resident option of shelters to separate out transitional housing. So basically what we're looking at here is CEDS has 4 different option sets for the homeless primary nighttime residents, and one of those is shelters, but shelters includes transitional housing, and Michigan actually looks at those separately. So Michigan separately tracks transitional housing and shelters in their data store. Currently, the CEDS element, homeless primary nighttime residence, includes shelters, transitional housing, and awaiting foster care in the shelters option set. This is the aggregation that occurs for EDFACS reporting. We need transitional housing pulled out of that option set, and or we need another way to track shelters and transitional housing separately. Other stakeholders may need additional items in this EDFACS element separated, such as unsheltered, which indicates the place where the student is unsheltered, the car, the park, the campground. It'd be good to have a work group, look at how states are tracking this information, and adjust the standard for more granularity. So that's basically the use case. What does Michigan need? They just need the ability to track sheltered and transitional housing separately. And so the use case is opened to be able to look at that information. So what I'm going to do here is submit the issue. This is a real issue, so it's not an example. It was just one we hadn't put in yet. Michigan actually does need that information. That's it. It's done. Submit the issue. That's all there is to starting the process. Now what's going to happen next, according to the process, the CEDS team is going to reach out to you, to the stakeholder, to make sure that we understand the need thoroughly, and then we're going to work with other stakeholders, such as everyone on this call, to determine the best approach to meet the needs of the community. So what type of things would we expect? Conversations about how, if we change this particular element and make each thing its own option set, what happens to those stakeholders who only collect this at the higher level, right? And they don't have that level of granularity like Michigan does. So we may need more than one way to represent this list, or maybe we don't need more than one way to represent this list. There's going to be a lot of discussions that are going to occur. How exactly can we do this? What's the best way we're going to do this for the stakeholder community, right? If I knew, it would already be done. But that's why it's an open use case now, and we are ready to start talking about it and how to make it happen. And it's all of you on this call, and it's other stakeholders that are going to decide how that progresses moving forward now. So real use case, real need. We need to separate this out so that it can be tracked in a more granular way. As this element walks through the process, documentation updates are going to be added to both GitHub. So there's going to be probably some comments left inside of here. There's going to be a pull request eventually. And then there's also going to be things added to the open source community, which I'm going to show you in a second. And when it's ready, finally, a pull request, as I mentioned, will be created to add it to the elements list. And then eventually it'll be added to the master list of elements for CEDS when it's been approved by the community. And then at that point, anyone can adopt it. And you can bring it into your own implementation, and you would have the ability to now separately track transitional housing and shelters. So that's the GitHub site. That's how you make a new issue. And then at that point, the process kicks off, and then we start taking a look and digging into exactly what it is that you need. I'm going to take you now over to the CEDS community site. And before I log in, this other site is basically for community activity. And it's just inside of the CEDS community, we have the CEDS open source community. If you're not yet a member of the CEDS community, I'm going to show you how to register for this community, as well as what's going to be happening here. So let's go back over here now to the presentation. And the website here is ceds.grads360.org. And many of you may already have access to the CEDS site, but if not, The CEDS, like I mentioned, is located at ceds.grad360.org. To register, you would click in the top right section where it says Request Access, and a box will appear that asks you to send your name, your title, and your organization to accounts@grad360.org. Send an email over there, and you will get a response back in a day or so with access to the CEDS community and your login information. Once this is established, once access is established, here we'll see links then when you log in to both using CEDS and to the open source community on the right side of the screen. You can click on the OSC to enter that community. And then once inside, you will see events that are scheduled and the work groups for the different repositories on the right side. You'll have access to each of the work groups to click on enter as well. And so now we're going to take a look at the CEDS open source community live. All right, let me go ahead and log into this. Logging in. All right, there's two communities, the Using CEDS and the CEDS open source community on the right side. The Using CEDS community is for anything related to CEDS, discussions, documents, links to other resources, etc. Basically, any kind of conversation or anything you want to know about CEDS is using CEDS. The open source community is all about development of the standard. So elements, updates, any updates or additions to the standard, also any updates or changes to the physical models of CEDS, as well as any additional resources built on top of those models. So it's all about the development of the standard. On the primary page, we'll go here to the open source community. On the primary page, we have an event section that will list any events we are having. The first event, as you can see here, listed is a routine open source community update meeting, which will take place on December 10th. How often we have that particular call will be dependent upon the activity taking place. Eventually, it may be a monthly call, may also occur just every other month. But the purpose of the CEDS open source update meeting is to provide an update of where things are with the use cases that have come in. So new use cases, use cases that are being worked on presently, use cases that have been completed and are ready to be moved into the master branch as approved part of the standard. All of this information, of course, is available to you through GitHub or through documentation in each of the work groups. But we wanted to have just a consolidated update meeting, via a virtual meeting online. So it's a place where you can go, and when you go there, you're going to get an overview of everything happening. It will also showcase ways that you can get involved in use cases being worked on or coming up, such as early middle college or homeless shelters, which would be two that are going to be coming up that you can get involved in. On this site, over on the right side, we presently have 3 separate workgroup locations. One is for the integrated data store, one is for the data warehouse, and then one is for elements. Inside of each is a location for discussions that can occur back and forth. So I'll just click on elements. No discussions yet, but those should be forthcoming now that we have the kickoff and we actually have issues in there. And then the workspace. So discussions that can occur back and forth, and then through email related to a particular use case, and then a workspace for any kind of related documentation related to those use cases. The discussion that's going to take place in here can be followed via email live or through a daily or weekly digest. So when you're first added to the open source community, you are default set to a daily digest of each of these work groups. If there are discussions that day, you'll get an email of whatever those discussions are once a day. And if there is not any discussions, you won't get any emails. But if you want to ever increase or decrease your subscriptions to any of the CEDS communities, you can do so. You would just go to the top, you would click on your name, and then you would scroll down, and then you have the ability to change your subscriptions to anything you would like them to be for the various communities on Grad 360 you have access to. So just by going to your name, you can update your actual subscriptions there. Okay. See here, that is basically the open source community. I'm going to take you back now to the PowerPoint. Stop sharing. All right, so current activity. While this is the kickoff of the open source community, things are already happening because it really never stops happening with CEDS. Multiple state education agencies are implementing the CID Generate tool, as you probably know. There are also several stakeholders rebuilding their SLDS or their data warehouses. This is not only at the SCA level, but also at the LEA level. And then we're also aware of some P20s that are redoing infrastructures based off of, or not P20, post-secondary that are redoing infrastructures based off of CEDS. And as I mentioned earlier, Michigan is working on expanding the CEDS data warehouse and hopes to be opening that repository on GitHub by the end of the year. So a lot of things taking place in implementations. It relates to element expansion, Michigan again being one as they work on their use case, which has to do with things related to students doing some things with post-secondary, a cohort's doing things with post-secondary. We also have a post-secondary work group that has reviewed CEDS for all of the IPEDS elements and has some additions to add into CEDS. And then we have the NCS Forum, who has done a review of the exit codes. We have DoubleLine, it's a vendor that's doing work with early childhood elements, and we'll be expanding CEDS net area. We have eScholar doing a gap analysis in relation to warehouse work, working with the states that they have, and they'll be contributing elements. We have constantly ongoing work with other standards organizations such as Access for Learning, EdFi, IMS, PESC, and a host of others. We continually have ongoing conversations with them about additional elements. And now that we've officially launched the OSC, these use cases will all be making their way into the CEDS elements repository on GitHub, probably within the next couple months. So I would encourage everyone to get an account out there and watch that location for the addition of new use cases being submitted. And anyone else on this call, whether state, LEA, institutions of higher education, vendors, nonprofits, etc., if you are doing something related to CEDS, let us know and take advantage of the open source community as a way to inform the community about the work that you are doing. And then finally, we have community expansion. We have the G3, which is the Generate Governance Group. They continue to meet and talk about opportunities that they can explore together as a community using Generate, which again, as we showed in the example, is built on that CEDS infrastructure. I know the SLDS program is gathering stakeholders together to talk answers to research questions, and they're working on actual outputs that'll be produced for common research questions that come directly out of the CEDS data warehouse. We've also had calls with several states who are actively implementing CEDS to foster some community development and to get conversations started across states. Basically, the community is coming together around standards, and that's a good thing. And we've seen that happening over the last several years, and it's just exponentially increasing. And I expect we're going to see great advances in collaborative data use in the next few years. So that's exciting work that's taking place. So what now? What's next? CEDS version 8 is going to be released for public comment November 22nd. This is the last release that is not going to go through the open source community. Obviously, from a governance perspective, we've had work groups, we've had all kinds of stakeholders engaged in the development of version 8, but it's been done the normal yearly cycle process way. Version 9, which would come out probably next year, close to November, that one's going to be vetted through the open source community. So the only way you'll see it get inside of version 9 is you'll see that it eventually has a use case on the GitHub site. And we'll go through that process, and you'll be able to see it out there and watch as it's developed. So the other thing would be to participate in the first open source community update call on December 20th. So if you want to know what's happening, here's a catalog of all the use cases that have come in. So far, here's what we're working on. Here's where you can get involved. Here's how you can help. There may be certain topics that you're passionate about that you would like to contribute to. Maybe you love the whole idea of early middle college and want to get involved in helping us define those elements, which would be exciting for me. Or perhaps you're really into that homeless primary nighttime residence, or maybe you have another use case that you want to open. Whatever it is, great place to come to that call where you can see how you can get involved in participating in different work groups as we define those things out. And then finally, obviously, join the open source community co-op, which was the Grad 360 site, and then also set up an account on the GitHub site so that you can be aware of what's happening and be able to follow those different listservs. Any communication that we have that we send out about the OSC will come through those listservs, either be on the GitHub site or be on the open source, CEDS open source community site. And then finally, one last time, I want to reiterate, contact us with any questions you have. We would love to talk with you individually. We'd love to talk with your team. We'd love to see how CEDS can help you. Any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out directly to me or directly to CEDS, and we can set up a time to talk. Now, we're going to take some questions that may have come in and try to answer any of those that we can. And so I will see if there's any, if Andrea or Tricia has seen any questions come through in the QA. If not, you guys can type your questions into the QA, but I have no idea what's occurred since I've been just chatting away.
No problem. Thanks, Dwayne. So we have had one question, and it is, any idea or guess on how long the approval process is going to take?
That is a great question, and the best answer I can give is that it's going to be related to the complexity of the actual use case, right? So if it's a need, let's say it's a need related to some type of reporting, like IPEDS reporting or CRDC reporting or EDFACS reporting, something. Right? I don't use EDFACS because we've already pretty well defined all that. But let's say it's related to IPEDS and post-secondary reporting. Those elements are well known. They're used by institutions of higher education across the country. They probably have standard definitions defined. If we're missing an element in CEDS for that or a change that needs to be made, it's been vetted fairly well. And so a change like that, could come through in a month or two, depending on, the complexity, or a month, well, maybe, right? It already exists. Maybe there's another standards organization that's already defined it. PESC's already worked on it, right? And they've already gone through that whole community, that organization of PESC, and they've already defined it out. We can adopt that rather rapidly because it's already been vetted. It's already been adopted by the community. But if it's something brand new, this middle early college, for instance, it's not a brand new thing, but as far as I can see, nobody out there has defined this. It's going to take some time. It may take a few months. It may not take quite that long to get the community together to actually come up with a good definition. Because what we don't want to do is go back and do it again. We want to get those who are collecting things related to early middle college. We want to have them be able to vet that information and come up with good definitions, good option sets that we can then plug into the actual physical model and people can adopt. So not a good answer to give an exact thing, but it's related to the complexity.
Well, I'd just like to add to that. So on the technical side, by the way, this is Nathan Clinton on the CEDS team. On the technical side, if there are changes made to any of the physical data structures, the integrated data store, the data warehouse, then our kind of initial thought was let's provide the community about a month or so to do their own impact analysis, so we can go back and look at Generate, make sure that EDFACS reporting through Generate isn't impacted based on the change going through the open source community. But again, this is all open source. This is your community. We're here just as facilitators to help with the development. So if that month time frame is too short or too long, we absolutely want it to be the right time frame for the community. So we're absolutely willing to change that. Also, any code changes that are submitted will be available through a separate branch, a feature branch, and pull request in GitHub. So you can always go out there and look at it. And if you need to move forward and you start implementing the change, willing to take the risk that that change may be adjusted here and there, then you have access to the code.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. The next question we have is, who may contribute to the source code and pull requests?
So anyone can contribute to the source code and pull requests. Naturally, it would be vetted. The changes that are made will be vetted through the community, but anyone is able to actually contribute to that. Short answer. That's the idea behind the community development.
Okay, thanks. And we have one more question that just came in. Is there a plan for the Generate solution to also be published as open source, i.e. surfaced on GitHub as additional repositories?
A lot of the components of Generate we plan on making open source. A lot of the migration scripts to pull data from the IDS, the Integrated Data Store, into the data warehouse, because that's general use, we're making that open source. But we don't plan on making the application itself and the reports open source at this time. And that's primarily because the department wants to be able to control and standardize the changes in the implementation of how the EDFACS files are represented and produced inside of that system. But pretty much everything on the database side leading up to the time where we create the reports themselves will be made open source.
All right. Any other questions? And I'm not seeing any or hearing any. Any questions, to type those into the Q&A. All right. If you guys get any other questions while I'm wrapping it up, then let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up. So if you do end up with any other questions, please feel free, again, as I mentioned, to go ahead and email me or contact us directly. We'd be happy to follow up and answer any questions you all have. Thank you all for attending, and have a great day.